share with you two scripture passages that speak to the Christian role or Christian responsibility within the voting process. And the first comes from Paul's letter to the Romans. And he says, "Let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those authorities that exist have been instituted by God. Therefore, whoever resists authority resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment. For rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Do you wish to have no fear of authority? Then do what is good, and you will receive its approval, for it is God's servant for your good. But if you do what is wrong, you should be afraid, for the authority does not bear the sword in vain. It is the servant of God to execute wrath on the wrongdoer. Therefore, one must be subject, not only because of wrath, but also because of conscience. For the same reason, you also pay taxes, for the authorities are God's servants, busy with this very thing. Pay to all what is due to them, taxes to whom taxes are due, revenue to whom revenue is due, respect to whom respect is due, honor to whom honor is due." And then reading from Jeremiah chapter 29. Jeremiah is talking to the people of Israel, to the Jews who've been taken into exile in the land of Babylon. During Jeremiah's lifetime, he spent a great deal of it warning the priests and the king and the people about the coming invasion of the Babylonian Empire. And he was basically saying, rely upon God, trust in God, hold to God's promises, and all will be well. But the king, being a politician, got afraid and so tried to create an alliance with Egypt. Egypt abrogated on their responsibilities, and so the Babylonians came in and conquered Jerusalem and hauled away the best and the brightest, the very best people, the people who had all the skills, who had all the wisdom and the learning, and took them off into Babylon as exiles. And part of the way that Babylon did this was they would take people from lands that they had conquered and put them in their own nation, but put them in there as a community. And they would say, you have the right to do whatever you want. You can continue to worship as you please. You can continue to build your culture as you please. But just remember that you're in Babylon. You're working for us. And so Jeremiah is writing to the people of Israel who are in exile because there's been some prophetic information wandering around that the people of Israel who are in exile should be resisting the Babylonians, should be standing against them, refusing to cooperate. Jeremiah offers a different view. The Lord who rules over all is the God of Israel. He speaks to all those he forced to go down from Jerusalem to Babylon. He says, build houses and settle down. Plant gardens and eat what they produce. Get married. Have sons and daughters. Find wives for your sons. Give your daughters to be married. Then they too can have sons and daughters. Increase your numbers there. Do not let the number of your people get smaller. Also work for the success of the city I have sent you to. Pray to the Lord for that city. If it succeeds, you too will enjoy success. The Lord who rules over all is the God of Israel. He says, do not let the prophets trick you. Do not be fooled by those who claim to have secret knowledge. Do not listen to people who try to explain their dreams to you. All of them are prophesying lies to you in my name. I have not sent them, announces the Lord. I know the plans I have for you, announces the Lord. I want you to enjoy success. I do not plan to harm you. I will give you hope for the years to come. Then you will call out to me. You will come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. When you look for me with all your heart, you will find me. So one of the news stories that really caught my attention this week, other than Prince Charles telling Putin that he was actually similar to Hitler, was the Roman Catholic bishop in Ottawa who said it was scandalous for Justin Trudeau to continue to practice his Catholic faith while supporting a political decision of being pro-choice. Although I think the bishop actually said it's the fact that he considers himself to be a devout Catholic, but then adheres to or advocates for abortion. The bishop's words are harsh, but intriguing. Trudeau considers himself to be a devout Catholic, the bishop says. He considers himself. The inference being that the bishop obviously does not consider him to be a devout Catholic. How could he be? He adheres and advocates for abortion, which I think if really you listen to what Trudeau's been saying, that's not what he's saying at all. But if he really was a devout Catholic, wouldn't he be ready to stand up and be counted as one who stands against abortion? If he was really a devout Catholic, wouldn't he stand up and be counted as one who defends the principles of the church? The bishop isn't just suggesting this, he's demanding it. He's expecting that Trudeau's faith should take precedence over his political agenda. How can someone call themselves a Catholic, the bishop is saying, and yet take a position so contrary to the beliefs of the church? So what motivated the bishop to make this pronouncement, this condemnation of Trudeau? After all, if you look back in your history books, in 1967, another Trudeau by the name of Pierre, who happened to be justice minister at the time, brought forward legislation that decriminalized homosexual activity, giving that famous statement that the state has no business in the bedrooms of the nation. He also brought forward at the same time a decriminalization of abortion, giving a woman the right to make a decision which is in her best interest in consultation with doctors. And yet, Pierre continued to be a devout Catholic. He was married in the church. His children were baptized in the church. He was buried out of the church. If he had been someone who was against the Roman Catholic faith, or if the bishops or cardinals of the day saw him as being irresponsible or apostate towards the beliefs of the church, then why did they allow him to continue in that way? Why baptize his children? Why let him be buried out of the church? So what motivated this bishop at this point in history to make this pronouncement against Justin? Is it a case that the Roman Catholic Church is more vulnerable these days? Weaker? So any threat against their authority is seen as dangerous. Other churches, I suspect, would also feel the same way. The church's authority within the community is less. It's weaker than it used to be. So any threat against authority, against the church's principles and doctrines, would appear to be a dangerous precedent. No doubt the voice of the Roman Catholic Church, indeed of the Christian church in general with society, is much diminished. So if those who profess to be Christian according to this bishop, in unchristian ways, and the church says nothing about it, doesn't challenge it, then perhaps the church's power will weaken further to the point where the church becomes entirely insignificant. Now, Justin's response to the bishop was that he has a lot of respect for his eminence and for any leaders within the church, but I do want to highlight that he has a very different role than I do. My role is to stand up and defend all Canadians, and my role in terms of that is separate from my personal religious views. The bishop's role is the defender of the faith. He is required, Trudeau suggests, to do that, to stand up for the faith, to defend its doctrines and proclamations. Trudeau understands and accepts why the bishop would be publicly chastising him. But he has a very different role than I do, says Justin. The bishop's role is to uphold church doctrine, whereas Trudeau's role as a political leader is to stand up for all Canadians. Trudeau creates a distinction between the values he might uphold within his religious perspective and the values he defends as a politician and leader. Now, I understand what Trudeau is saying. His duty, his calling, if you will, is to represent the needs of all Canadians, not just those who think like him. Not just those who hold the same understanding of faith that he does. So if his religious values and his political values come into conflict, Trudeau will choose his political values. Which got me thinking, does the same logic apply to us, to you and me? As we approach the election on June 12th, do our religious values inform or influence our political beliefs, or is it the other way around, where our politics take prominence? Will our faith enter into the political process at any point in this election? At any stage, will you ask yourself, do I see my Christian values reflected in the candidates I am asked to vote for? When we vote, do we do so as defenders of the faith? Or do we see ourselves as standing up for and defending all Canadians, all Ontarians? Maybe the choice is one and the same. If I vote based on my religious values, I am also standing up for all Canadians, all Ontarians, even if others do not see things the way I do, because I believe by upholding my religious beliefs in the ballot box, I am acting according to God's will. And God's will is always for the good of all. Isn't it? That might be one way we look at it. So when I vote, I should vote for the person, for the party that most faithfully reflects God's values in their platform. Although I'm constantly amazed how God's values and God's will are consistently reflected in the party I've always voted for. Where does faith and politics meet in our lives? How does faith inform our vote on June 12th? I want to look at two quite different perspectives on politics and faith. In his letter to the Romans, Paul says, "Let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God." There are no qualifiers to what Paul says. He doesn't call people to be subject to righteous government, or a government that is following godly principles. He says be subject to the governing authorities, period. For it is representative of God's authority within the world. The government upholds God's laws, Paul says. So even an unchristian government serves to preserve the right within the land. Paul views the government as authority, as the instrument of God for good. If you sin, the government will punish you on God's behalf. If you do what you're supposed to do, the government will be an instrument of blessing on God's behalf. Obedience is Paul's only consideration. Paul wants the government to keep sinful humanity in line. So the government's role, in Paul's eyes, is to bring the fear of God into the populace. How appropriate then that he should be living in the Roman Empire. An empire that was built on fear, on authority, on power, and on wrath. So Paul's suggestion for voting on June 12th is not to worry so much about whether the party is faithful to God or not, but which party will wield the fear of God most effectively. Which party will maintain order, keep the province in line, keep you and me in line. Jeremiah, on the other hand, is writing to the people of Israel in exile in Babylon. They've been ripped away from their homes and their lands and placed in communities in Babylon and told to carry on. They aren't slaves. They have the ability to choose how their lives will progress, even if they are forced in exile. So what should they do? Should they resist their captors as a kind of civil disobedience to stand up for their rights? Should they refuse to cooperate lest the work that they do, the things that they accomplish, actually benefit their captors? Should they just sit on their hands and weep? If anyone has the right to choose based on fear, it would be the exiles in Babylon. Jeremiah's advice to the people is to actively engage in the well-being of their community, because when they do, the community benefits, he says. And when the community benefits, everyone does, including the exiles. The highest and best political action, Jeremiah suggests, is to fully invest oneself in the community, to build homes, to create families, to work for the betterment of the city. Give your very, very best for others, for in so doing, you create the very best for yourselves. Jeremiah doesn't base his words on fear, doesn't base them on God's authority. For Jeremiah's call is not to base our living on fear or obedience or towing the party line. His advice is to build community, to nurture a healthy culture, for in so doing, even in negative situations, you empower God's purposes to be fulfilled. When we vote, oftentimes, especially in the last decade, it seems, our vote is based on fear. Political parties use fear very effectively. The goal is to make us afraid. Afraid of what the other guys will do if they come into power. So vote for us, and we will stop them. We will save you from your fears. Paul would identify with that attitude. But I reject that in any way as a faithful choice. Doesn't it make more sense, more Christ-like sense, to vote out of a hope for well-being rather than out of fear? In the same way that you created a vision for this congregation based on what is best about who you are and not about what you are afraid of. So let your political decisions be based on the same. Fear is a very selfish emotion. It provokes me to vote for what will preserve me, what will protect me, especially protect me from others who don't think like me, don't believe like me. Fear does not take into account the needs or values that others have. But well-being as a motivator almost always is community-based. It sees potential and promise within our community. It sees the very best that we can be rather than constantly fearing the worst. I don't care who you vote for on June 12th. I'm not going to tell you how to vote on June 12th. There is no party which reflects the will of God above any of the others. And there never is. My only comment would be to vote faithfully. To vote in a Christ-like way. Vote for vision and not for fear. Vote for promise, not obedience. Vote for what will provide you with the best opportunity to nurture a healthy community. Vote for what will pull you out of yourself and place you in the midst of the community you seek to serve. The party that will help you best live out your purpose statement of being Christ's hands with the community. Vote in that way. And that is indeed a faithful choice.